God, yes.
We say welcome to the mission, show us all what you can do. We need a man with vision, so we put our trust in you.
Still, I mean, that's still really far away. Can you all come in? I mean, you know, yeah. So, I was doing events yesterday at the Clover Hill Winery, and I brought a smattering of some pretty special instruments. But I guess I'll tell you a story first. John, you know this already, and some of you do. But I became interested in instrument making when I was about eight years old, and my dad had a really good wood shop, 4 brothers, and we had workbenches with different levels. We each had a workbench. We each had our drawer full of tools. My dad was a woodworker, and so it was pretty good. We had a table saw and a bunch of hand tools and drills and everything. So we fiddled around the basement. I tried when Elvis came out. I think I bought Hound Dog. You know, that was my first record, and I wanted to make a guitar. So I went down to the basement and I made this awful. It was like a caveman guitar, you know. And I kept trying to do it, mostly out of whatever was laying around the basement. I went to the hobby shop and they had the balsa wood, remember? And I tried to make one out of balsa wood, and you know, of course, it fell apart. And I took it apart and made something else, and I used mat board for a top. You know, there weren't any books. There was nothing. And if you went to a guitar maker and asked, you know, about the trade, no way. You know, they weren't going to share or give away their secrets. And so this went on. By the time I was 12, I built 3 or 4 or 5 weird things, and kept at it. And I tried to learn how to play guitar. I've got hot dog fingers. I had a hard time on the guitar. Went to college, started playing the bass, and that was a little easier for me. And I learned what I didn't know music theory or anything. I just learned boxes, what I call boxes on the bass, you know, and got pretty good at the bass. Played in a couple bands, and went out to California. I was a real good hippie. I've got some pictures. Shocking. The whole California thing kind of fell apart in the early '70s, and I came back home. I had been an illustrator. Had, produced probably 300 drawings, and I started publishing drawings, and opened a little art gallery in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and I started having art exhibits. And I had an art exhibit at the school where I went to in New Jersey. And the art teacher was older and having trouble relating to everybody, to the kids that were all taking acid and everything. So took a look at me and said, well, the kids are relating to you pretty well, you know? And so they hired me. So I had to drive from Bethlehem, Pennsylvania to Blairstown, New Jersey to teach. And I had to go right through Nazareth. And saw a billboard for Martin Guitars, and stopped in and took the tour. And I couldn't believe it. I just was totally floored. And afterwards, I asked the receptionist if there was any scrap wood. A guy came in here looking for scraps earlier. I almost told him, you know, I know where there's some scraps. So after the tour, you know, she said, well, you just go around the side of the building, and there's a dumpster, and you know, help yourself. And I went around, and I hit the jackpot. It was the right day. With you know, rosewood and ebony and koa wood and chunks of mahogany and spruce and braces and everything. And I filled my whole, I drove my car around, filled my whole came back an hour later and filled my car up a second time. And over the course of my 4-year teaching career, I bet I went back there 500 times. And I had every wood shop in like a 50-mile radius. Is this 50 miles from my house? I started getting good pieces, you know, being a little more selective, you know, showing up on the right day when the garbage, before the garbage truck came. And also the foreman at the back door started to know who I was, called me the kid. And his name was Harvey Samuels. And you're all from this area, so you know about the Pennsylvania Dutch a little bit. Yeah. So everybody at Martin was Pennsylvania Dutch. Some of them could barely speak English. And so Harvey came out, and I left teaching, and I didn't have a job, but I had my little art gallery. And Harvey came out with a stack of Sitka spruce tops that had little knots in them, and he said, "I saved some stuff for you," and handed it down to me, and I'm in the dumpster. And he said, "Well, what do you do with this stuff anyhow?" And I had two weird instruments that I made. You know, when they're bending the sides at Martin's, they were doing all hand bending. And sometimes the waste would break, you know, and then they just throw them into the garbage. So the whole pair. So I would take the bent sides up to the point where they break and just cut them off and make an instrument like kind of like a mandolin shape, stick a neck on it and put 8 strings on it or whatever. So I had a couple of those, and I handed them up to him, and he said, "Do you mind if I parade him around the shop once?" And off he went, and old Mr. Martin, who was, I think, 85 years old at the time.
Was this at the old plant?
Oh, this is the new factory.
The new factory?
Yeah, this is 1976. So Mr. Martin, he would walk, he'd hold his pants up like this, and he'd walk around. He knew everybody's name in the whole factory, about 100 people. And he's walking around, and Harvey says, "Look what the kid made." And he looked at him and he said, "Tell that kid to apply for a job." So Harvey came back. "The old man says you should apply for a job, C-H-O-B." And so I brushed off, kind of an afro, and went around the front. And receptionist is there doing her nails, and said, "I'd like to apply for a job." And she said, "Oh, I don't think we have anything for you." And I said, "Well, any opening?" She said, "One opening, design draftsman." So I've been doing design drafting for 10 years, and I've been teaching design drafting for 4 years, and I'm an expert at ink on Mylar drafting, and I have examples of my drafting in the car. We're really looking for somebody that has some experience with woodworking. And I said, "Well, you know, here's a little lathe turning that I made out of your scrap, and it has a little pearl inlay that I found in the garbage, and I have more of them in the car." And she said, "Well, we're really looking for somebody that has some experience with musical instruments and guitars." And I said, "Well, here's 2 guitars I made," and the old man says I should apply for a job. So reluctantly, she called personnel, and they came up and interviewed me and said, "Well, could you start tomorrow?" And I said, "No, I have to go to the Bob Dylan concert." I can start on Wednesday. So they set me up with a nice little drafting room, and the first day they brought me all the dovetail blocks from the from the 1 ukulele, soprano ukulele, tenor ukulele, concert ukulele, baritone ukulele, O size, double O size, triple O size, dreadnought 12 fret, everything. Box, full front blocks, and I had to draw all the front blocks. And then the rear blocks, and drew all the rear blocks. And then every brace, the number 1 brace, number 2 brace, everything. The contours, every dimension, millimeters and inches. I drew everything, and then I had to do the assembly drawings of everything. And when I was done with a zillion guitars, and I was obsessed with it, I can't tell you how valuable it was to be able to know what the dimensions were. Every night I would go home, and I had a whole basement full of Martin guitar wood, And every night I would go home and experiment with the things that I was learning through the drafting process. And so I built, you know, weird instruments, always experimenting, always trying woods that weren't necessarily the right choice. I built a lot of ebony guitars because I thought it was cool. Get big pieces of ebony, you know, and keep sanding, and the ebony would, you know, crack. But we had the sawmill going, and my job evolved through the years. I got fired for insubordination. That's a whole different story. They hired me back after a couple months, and I worked during the strike, and they brought me onto the line. They realized that I knew how to build guitars, so they needed workers that could do anything. They had people from the office scraping the bindings and things, you know. So it was a tough time. So during that time, I glued bridges and did final inspection and final neck fits, and you know, I loved it, but I didn't like repetition. Some people can do that, you know, every day, 50 bridges, you know, or whatever. Well, during the strike, it was 15 guitars a day. Now we're making 300.
Yeah, 300 now?
Yeah. Wow. So the repetition was tough, and I wanted to do different things. And eventually, that the strike dissipated, and I got to do a lot of prototyping and design work, which is what I really wanted. I wanted to be involved in art or creative stuff, and so what I would do is I would just start to do what I wanted to do and see if anybody noticed and said, hey, why don't you do that? And I'd already been doing it for 3 months, you know. And by the time they put that on my job description, I was already moved ahead and was doing something else that I wanted to do. So I built, all in all, about 150 instruments during I went back to Nazareth, and we put together a little group of people that founded Asia, the Association of Stringed Instrument Artisans. And I became the executive director of that. And I loved being at the center of it because I was publishing the newsletter, which started as 4 pages and grew into Guitar Maker magazine. And pretty soon became a 4-color magazine that was really great. And what I would do is I'd get stuff from everybody, and I'd publish whatever anybody sent. I'd just kind of gestate it and spit it back out, and it really grew nicely. And the symposiums were fantastic. We had Mario Macaferri and Manuel Velasquez and C.F. Martin III, and we had incredible people. Richard Schneider and Dr. Michael Kasha, and everybody you can imagine in the guitar making field, and major people. And we were all inclusive, and the whole idea was to share information, and share we did. We I think were responsible between the Guild, which is a good it's a good organization, and Asia. We spurred the guitar making movement that you're a part of today, and things have really changed. Now, instead of some secretive luthier in their shop and not letting you into the back room, oh, your neck is warped. I need to go do some work on it. Go back, have a couple cups of coffee, turn the truss around once, have a couple cigarettes, another cup of coffee, wait an hour and a half, spray some water on your forehead, take the guitar back. Yeah, that'll be $200 for half a turn on the truss rod. So things really changed. Bill Campiano, who was a member of the board, wrote that fantastic book on guitar making, and then all of a sudden there's just a huge number of books Benedetto and Irvin Samaji and everybody. Didn't even you even wrote a book, did you?
I didn't write a book yet, but I have one in the works.
Well, okay.
You're thinking of the guitar book.
That's right.
That's Phil Corey.
Right. So now, you know, online or in books or through these different groups and symposiums and meetings like this, everything's accessible to you. And back then, good luck finding tone woods. I mean, there was this place called Vitale Imports in New York City. It's kind of weird. Sold a couple little tools and some bad mahogany, but it was hard. You know, it was hard to get wood. And now there's everybody, and Hibden Hardwoods and all kinds of suppliers. And John making molds. You know, when I built guitars, all my acoustic guitars were built completely without molds. I didn't have him around. I can't believe what you make the molds for. You know, it's such a pain in the neck to make a mold. He's making them for nothing. $100, 90 bucks. Unbelievable, unbelievable. And Stuart McDonald, you know, with Dan Erlewine and the number of things. I just saw this cool little tool that he invented, which is a little brace gluer, and that slips under them and you squirt the glue under. You know, he's always.
You started with woodworkers, woodworkers book. Before 1833, when I can remember me and my dad went up to
Woodworker's Dream.
Woodworker's Dream.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my 50 jobs at Martin, North Street, the old North Street plant was kind of dormant. It was costing them a lot to heat it because they needed to heat it, but nobody was over there, so the sawmill was really struggling, and they had all this wood, but the architects weren't buying it. And I said, well, you know, there's a good retail trade for this. And I said, let me have North Street. And they said, okay. So I went over and I started the store called Woodworker's Dream, which we sold 55 different species of wood. You know, from African ebony, Indian ebony, Macassar ebony, Honduras rosewood, tulip wood, king wood, East Indian rosewood, you know, zebra wood, Paduke, Cocobolo, Purple Heart, Persimmon, Primavera, Basswood, not basswood, on and on and on. Just incredible to have all these woods and resaws and a huge band mill that could take 54-inch diameter logs, big logs, you know. George Nakashima was our best client, and he had a guy named Frank that went around with a cherry picker and would drive all over New England looking for walnut logs that were, and the rule was people would call Frank and say, hey, I've got a walnut log, and they want to get rid of it, you know. You come cut it down for me. You know, we usually pay $1,000 to have somebody cut the tree down. So he'd send them to the backyard and said, okay, I want you to hug the tree at chest level and tell me if you can touch your fingers. And if you could touch your fingers, he didn't want, but if you couldn't, he'd send the truck and he'd cart it away. So we cut probably 1,500 logs for George Nakashima over the years, and that was a huge honor. I was running the mill during that time, and it was in terms of experimenting with tone woods. If we saw a nice piece of wood, as a matter of fact, George Nakashima brought this burl of, what is it? It's from madrone. Madrone is the wood. It's from the Pacific Northwest. It's a burl, bubbling, boiling, flamey figure going every which way through this monstrous thing. And it came on the back of a flatbed and they dropped it down and we put it on the mill, and George was there and he said, okay, I want you to cut a piece of 8/4 and see what this looks like. And it was like crimson red with gold and everything in it, and you know, our jaws dropped, and George saw me and he saw me drooling over this thing, and he said, do you think you could cut like 4 pieces, about that thing, you know, and it was a pretty big thing, you know. And he said, sure, you want to try some guitars, and so and it was wet, you know, soaking wet wood. Cut the 4 pieces of flitch, and I held it out. It was beautiful, and the thing just went like this, went like that, until it was like a piece of wet cardboard. We put it up on sticks and dried it, and I have them in my shop, and I'm not telling you what my address is. I had, like I said, I usually try to give people an idea of my history, and I'm going to do this like pow 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 pow, just to give you a little bit of visual, and then we'll talk about the cars that I brought. So at a young age, I was an illustrator. I had an eye accident when I was little and lost my vision in my right eye. As a kid, I drew weird cartoons and started being obsessed with vision, and started producing artwork like this. I wrote a lot of short stories and poetry that I published myself in different forms. Became obsessed with Buckminster Fuller and started building geodesic domes. And this was great for traveling around doing hippie. That's Stowe, Vermont. I decided at one point, went to Gettysburg College, and did a protest where I installed myself in a cage. And
Did you keep the key?
no key, but hey, I tell you, the girls came in. And that was the best part. And I left college after 3 years, went to California as a result of this Life magazine cover, and joined Morning Star Ranch, a very famous commune in California. It was run by Lou Gottlieb, and I was illustrating constantly, and also building unusual architectures there, teepees and things like that. Kept drawing, producing a lot of Eastern-oriented mandalas and word rings, meditative types of drawings. There's a word ring that is a continuous run-on sentence. So I think you can see a progression that the drawings are starting to move from geometry into more realism. Gradually moving towards nature. And then, oh, and by the way, Tullio DeSantis lives right nearby, a huge influence on me. My friend Judley, this is one of Tullio's drawings, just lives north of Reventher. Amazing artist. And he had a huge influence on me. And I started to move from the geometrical into pen and ink pointillism. That's a tribute to M.C. Escher. Universal models and gradual breaking down of geometry into pointillism, and more organic or natural. Going backwards now. So this is really the kind of the end point of my drawings, where I want to see what happened here. I think I went to the end. I wanted to So I started doing business cards for my friends. They really appreciated it. When we came to Martin, there's the dumpster. And one of my draftings of the D28, very difficult to draft guitars the right way. that drafting became an illustration that I've sold about 7,000 of, which is pretty good. That's still extra
I have
income.
2 of them. And the one for North Street. Did North Street?
Yeah, I did. I did some stuff for the sawmill. There's the North Street one. That's Woodworker's Dream, and that's now Guitar Maker's Connection. And Liz and Gail are there. Still some parts for those 3. That was C.F. Martin III, fellow who hired me. Really remarkable, wonderful man. He was struggling, and I made a cane for him. I saw him struggling with the cane and complaining. The cane was the wrong height, didn't fit his hand correctly. He was unstable, and I made him a rosewood cane with a pearl inlay in it from a 0040H design, and he really loved that cane, and that meant a lot to me. Like I said, really loved working on the wood lathe, and started. There's that little urn. Started using the rosewood scraps and the mahogany to make designs on the lathe, and also jewelry boxes, and did a lot of these. Coffee cups. And eventually, I was fortunate to find a studio. This is now Dale Unger's Nazareth Guitar Institute, but this was my home right on Broad Street in Nazareth, and it was an old Mennonite church, and they couldn't sell it. The price kept going down and down and down. I got it for $25,000. A huge, nice basement, not quite this big, but big, and a great first floor, great for concerts. Installed a recording studio and a soundboard, and hung all my artwork, and had the guitars all over the place, and had famous people coming in, John Sebastian and Tom Paxton, and everybody that would come to Martin, I'd get them over, and often they did concerts here at the church. That's my kitchen sink. I wanted everything in my entire world to be made out of wood, which has turned out to be kind of a disaster. Yeah, wood and water don't always go together, but this was, you know, had like 8 coats of polyurethane on it, and that was not enough. Ended up tiling that, but that's all made out of wood. That was pretty cool for a while. My bathtub was wood also. And that's working on an ebony 8-string acoustic guitar in the basement, doubled up on the bass strings. There's the view of the church. It was really just a remarkable place. That's from the balcony. And performed a lot on the auto harp. I brought a new auto harp that I have from George Orthy, who is just north of Harrisburg. I think the finest auto harps that are being made anywhere in the world are being made by him. More drawings. I got into these chord wheels, chord wheels for transposition of notes. Very helpful if you want to change keys, but then the chord wheels, I became obsessed with it and evolved them over many years into what's called Dick Boak's musical chord wheel, which is really quite complex. And it was the idea, it's like a circular slide rule that would give you any chord, give you chords in different keys, transposition, everything. Notes on the fingerboard. And there's the inside of the chord wheel that you wouldn't see. There's a front and back to that. So I also started, since I had Woodworker's Dream, I had all this extra wood, and we had these little boxes from Sweden. We closed down the Levine guitar factory, and I brought a container load of supplies. They had all these little boxes that used to be called the Sound of Wood. And they had Sitka spruce and European spruce that you hit with a hammer to tell the difference between the spruces. And they had like 1,000 of these little boxes. and they were this size, and I brought them all back. And I had a contest with anybody that came into Woodworker's Dream. You want to make a ukulele? I'd give them the neck and the fingerboard, because I had about 8 zillion necks and fingerboards for ukuleles that weren't being used. And everybody made a bunch, and I made a bunch. That's one that I did in 1981. They were a lot of fun with fretless ukes.
Don't see a lot of them, do you?
Not too many. So this guitar, which I made in 1981. It's based on a tipple or tenor ukulele size, and I really love little instruments. So the first Martin instrument that I bought was the day that I started. There was a sign on the bulletin board that said employees could buy one guitar a year, and I didn't have much money yet. And I went to personnel and said, I want to buy a guitar. And said, you've only been here for 2 hours. And I looked at the price list, and there was T28, a little rosewood tipple. And I bought that day, and I pretty much bought a guitar every year. I've got about, I don't want to tell you how many, and I'm not telling you where. But serious gas here. So during the strike, they called me in to build prototypes for electric guitars. Frank Martin, Chris Martin's father, who was kind of a mess, he wanted to make electric guitars and go head-to-head with Gibson and Fender and everything. And so I started prototyping. This was called the Swan, which was, I thought I was making it out of mahogany. It turns out it was Spanish cedar, so it was light as a feather. And it's one of the best electric guitars I ever made, completely by accident. The lighter the wood for an electric guitar, the swamp ash is kind of partly rotten wood and really light, and the Carina, which is the white mahogany. Those woods are very light, and they absorb all the vibrations of the strings and add a sweetness. I was going the other direction completely because I was fascinated with the notion of lamination. I just loved sculpting with a rasp, sculpting into laminations and exposing these types of ovals and swirls. So I also was deluded into thinking that extremely heavy guitars were better because they had tremendous sustain. You'd hit a note and it would just keep going on forever. Whereas the Spanish cedar, lightweight stuff, the notes decay quickly, but it's so sweet. So I'm leaning more towards the sweetness. By the way, this was an ergonomic guitar, kind of Picasso-esque, has a trough for your arm. I really didn't like the idea of, there's the ebony 8-string guitar that has doubled up bass strings, so you can really design for open D or open G tunings. This is the first acoustic bass. Interesting story, the vice president of production told Chris Martin, Chris wanted to have a bass made because his college roommate played bass and had been bugging him for years. The vice president said it's going to cost $100,000 in tooling and blah, blah, blah to make one prototype, and it's going to take 8 months. And I overheard that, and I went over to Woodworker's Dream, and I went on the bandsaw and cut a neck out, and got a fingerboard from Ken Smith Basses, and got some bend sides from a J18 body, and threw this together in a week. Sent it over to lacquering. They had it back to me the next week. Put the bridge on, got some end pins, and spun them on the lathe, and made a set of bridge pins for it. Took it to Chris Martin, and it was like, 18 days from the time that the vice president, who then got marched into Chris Martin's office and was packing his bags. So that's the first acoustic bass. I'm fascinated with the notion of having guitars that look like acoustic guitars but would be actually electric guitars. So this is very thin and has a through the body neck, just like the bass here, and it has a mahogany, quite thin mahogany back with electronics routed in. I hated the idea of using metal or plastic anywhere, so I always went to great trouble to turn wooden knobs, make wooden covers. I hate the use of screws, and I think this is if there's anything that I would want to be remembered for, it's that little button there, because this is the coolest thing in the world, and unfortunately I broke this, so I have it masking taped shut. But what this is, when you depress, it's a little spring-loaded button. It has a little hook, and it goes like this, and the hook has a little bent nail that goes and grabs a ledge on the inside of the ebony plate. And I should, here, you hold that for a second. Just take this off with my guitar pick, because it's what works best.
What happens if it breaks when it's in the closed position?
Well, you just pick it. So one of the things that Roger Sadowski taught me, and Roger's one of my best friends, fantastic guy, is about a Faraday cage. You know about a Faraday cage? Yeah. Good. So this is copper, self-adhesive copper foil, which lines the whole thing. And I brought the foil up so that it makes contact with the back of the ebony. That was a bad battery that I didn't change. And so what you're doing is you're creating an electronic circuit that is part of the ground circuit that prevents any. By the way, here's that little button here, and it would go into this little ledge here. But the ebony broke, so I'm going to fix that with a piece of brass so that it never breaks. So this was a thin-bodied cutaway acoustic electric that looks like an acoustic, and I also did one that was the exact same thing but looked like an electric. So a little double cutaway. These are pretty early. Tim Thiel's working on some things that are copies of kind of copies of my ideas from this time period. Because of the electronics is really good these days.
Is that vine or harmonics or whatever?
Well, Chris Martin calls it the vine of twigs, because there's not many leaves on it. But this was the idea here, and this was Dave Nichols is our good friend, the pearl inlay expert, and the idea was I wanted him to cut a pattern for me, but I felt so guilty to ask him to do it, and so I designed a pattern that was perfectly symmetrical, that he could glue two pieces of pearl together with white glue, cut them as one piece, drop them in water, and they would come apart, and he'd have half the cutting to do, you know. And so that was the idea here. But also, what I did is I took a scale length, and I divided it in half. This is on illustration board. I drew a line where the octave would be. And then I divided it into 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, drew lines, put little dots, and I did 1/5, 2/5, 3/5, 4/5, 5/5, drew lines, put a little dot, 1/6, 2/6 is the same as a third, etc. I kept doing that for up until probably 1/25, 2/25, 3/25, until I had a scatter chart of where the harmonic locations were. The primary harmonics had many, many dots, all around the octave, around the quarter, 3/4, 1/3, 2/3. And I drew the pattern with spines that ended, depending on their size and shape, that ended at major harmonic positions and the little smaller harmonic positions, which are definitely related to the scale length and the fret locations. So it's called the violent harmonics. It's completely useless to a slide player. But it's pretty. A little 00, this was a Macassar ebony Church of Art guitar. Dave Nichols did a beautiful little inlay for me on that. And this is this guitar here, which I think is probably of all of the acoustic guitars that I made in my terrible basement with terrible humidity. And this one has a repaired top crack. It's still one of the nicer guitars that I've done. And it has beautiful Honduras rosewood with Paduke bindings, and I tried to match the neck to match the Paduke. And the spruce came from the attic of North Street. It was a piece of wood that had been set aside for repairs. And if you look at the grains here, we're looking at probably 50 grains an inch. Unbelievable piece. So there's Guitar Maker magazine. And like I said, the great thing here is I got to know everybody in the entire industry, small makers, middle-sized makers, major companies, and it really helped me in my career at Martin, and it helped me in my interest for guitars. This is one of the acoustic basses that preceded this one. This is a beautiful bass. So, Fine Woodworking magazine has what's called the Fine Woodworking Design Book, which is a tremendous honor to be a part of, because they take the best woodworking from all around the world. And I was writing articles for Fine Woodworking, one about the tone of rosewood, and working with rosewood called the Rosewood Jungle, that you can look up online. But I had all these species of wood from Woodworker's Dream, and we've been cutting samples, little index card samples that I made this big display of all the woods that we carried. And we had leftover strips. I said, wow, these are great. And there was enough to make book matches of them. So I did this drawing of how I envisioned the guitar. The ebony fins are, people rest guitars on stage like this, but with the strap button and everything, they tip over. So the ebony fins were to be able to do that without having the guitar tip over. And, light has changed the color of the wood considerably over the years. I don't know if you noticed this. This is actually East Indian rosewood, and it looks like mahogany almost. It's just because it sat in a window, and that's what light does to rosewood. But I had a lot of fun with this, and I spent a lot of time. You wouldn't believe the glue-up job I had diluted the Type-On glue, yellow Type-On. I diluted it down so that it brushed on really nicely. And I did this section, and the neck individually. And brush the glue on, slap it, brush the glue on, slap it, get it all together, and then get the clamps and start tightening the clamps, and it'd be like 2 gallons of glue dripping all over the place on the floor. But really a wonderful, fun project. And lots of sculpture involved in this.
Dick, do you have drawings? You said you drew, so before you knock all this up, you do preliminary drawing on all your stuff, like a sketch?
Actually, for the shape of the body, I would draw right on the wood.
Oh, okay.
And erase it and draw it and get it the way I wanted it, and then start. And I always like the idea of sculpting this so that it's really comfortable for your right arm.
Ergonomic, right? Yeah.
And also that this radius is different than this radius.
Oh, okay.
And that this takes you all the way.
All the way up.
Instead of in here someplace that you can really get to it. And fretless instruments are so fun to make because you don't have to worry about anything. There's only one critical dimension on a fretless bass. And like I said, the other thing is, this is interesting. Like I said, I hate, you need to adjust the truss rod, and you have to, does anybody have a screwdriver? Or the back plate and everything? So the idea here, and once again, lacquer tends to stick. Where's the guitar pick? So I always thought that this was very clever. Make a liar out of me. So here's the little trough for the truss rod, and the truss rod Alan mentioned. adjustment is right there. So this is just a little, this is a little trough of ebony with two little screws on either side. This drops in to, there's two little indentations routed laterally here for the screws to drop into. So they drop in there, and once they're in place, then the whole thing's pushed forward, and there's no, you know, I just think it's elegant.
It's clean.
Were you do the prototypes for the EM18 and the EB18?
Yeah, and that's when around the time I got fired. But I started 12 prototypes, and they were laminated. And the whole idea is that the center lamination, the neck was going to be glued on. Center lamination, all the machining would be done to it. You dado out for the two pickups. You drill for the bridge. You route laterally slots for all the wiring chases to go through. And then you would glue the wings on and do the rest of the work. And that's why I like the laminating. And we could use scrap bridge blanks and scrap mahogany sides and things from the garbage and recover a lot of wood and use them for the electric. And we had an engineer that came in named No Neck Bosworth, because his ears connected directly to his shoulders. He was total Neanderthal. He came in, and I don't want to make too many jokes about basswood, but he called the bass guitars, he called them bass guitars. You know, and I didn't correct him, right? And because he was such an idiot. So for like a year he went around, hey, you know, where's the bass guitar that I'm working, you know? And it was really funny. So here's two more laminate guitars. This is a matched pair with walnut and mahogany prototypes in 1980. Martin actually went ahead and made the guitars, but they kind of followed the wishes of No Neck Bosworth, and the guitars I wasn't proud of the result, and they didn't last very long. This is a spruce goose. I built a number of these out of all spruce because I always thought, well, very lightweight. They're amazing to play as long as you don't touch your body to them. If you put them against your body, it deadens the back and you get a different sound. You got to hold them out here. But they're really fun to make and very lightweight. And also in Dale Under's course, the Martin Guitar Design course, we were working on sculpting guitars out of this foam. It's a hard foam, and it rasps and cuts really quickly. You can do very quick sculptural work. And this is an idea that I had as a result of my long friendship with Marion McAferry. I hope you know who he is. If you don't, you should. You've got to brush up on that. Selmer, he did all the Selmer guitars for Django Reinhardt before World War II. And he was a pioneer in dye injection molded plastics. He invented and patented the plastic clothespin, of which he manufactured about 25 billion of them and made a fortune. And he also was so fast, he was such a great instrument maker. When he got into plastics, he started making plastic. He did the little Beatles guitar and the Rolling Stones little plastic toy guitars, but he became obsessed with it and started to take the material seriously and add in glass content to give it a ping. And he met Arthur Godfrey, I guess around 1946. And backstage with Arthur was playing a Martin ukulele on television. And McAferry was making plastic reeds because you couldn't get French reeds anymore for the woodwinds. And Arthur Godfrey got introduced to him, and he said, if you could make this this ukulele for $5, I could sell 1 million of them on television. And that's what he did. He made a little plastic ukulele called the TV Pal, and sold 7 million of them, $5 a piece. Do the math. So this guitar, reason why I got off on that tangent, This was designed to be a three-piece dye injection molded plastic guitar using high glass content, clear dye injection molded plastics. Problem is the molds to make something like this cost about 100 grand. So I also did a lot of artwork. This is laser artwork for pick guards. I just wanted to see how it worked. You know, it kind of burns into the pick guard and makes kind of a diarrhea color, which is really attractive. But I still think there's a lot of possibility for laser etched artwork on different parts of the guitar.
Is there depth in that etching?
Very slight.
Slight. So you could use it
Just
as
burning the
inlet?
surface, and you know, if it's nitrate, you got to watch yourself.
If the material was laminated, could you burn through the top laminate and
Yeah,
end
you
up
probably
with
wouldn't have a smooth surface underneath. You know, the laser leaves kind of a
Artwork.
yeah. Hard to describe. It leaves a slightly rough surface.
some sort of coating or filling then over it to
Yeah, you could rub
smooth?
mastic into it, or you know, lamp black or something. You could do that. I was hoping that the color would be a little different, but this is the color of burnt pick guard here. Still think it's a neat idea.
What would be a good color for it?
Well, I don't know. Fair enough. So, Sounding Board Magazine said, you know, worked with Eric Clapton after he appeared on MTV Unplugged. I got a lot of phone calls about what he was using, and I ended up calling his office and telling his manager actually that we were getting a lot of inquiries about what Eric was using, and how would Eric feel about us starting a foundation to raise money for children's safety because of what happened with his son. And he was really moved by it. And so we did Eric Clapton's signature model. That was my project. And it was a hugely successful project that afterwards the sales manager came and put his arm around me and said, well, what are you going to do next, Dick? And I tried to get Paul McCartney. He's hard to get to, but we ended up doing more than 150 different projects. Each one of them very special. Joan Baez and Steve Howe, yes, Marty Stewart and Travis Tritt and John Sebastian and David Grisman. And, you know, all of my heroes. This was Ted Koppel's Nightline with Stephen Stills. That was a great honor. And Merle Haggard made a special back for him, just like this. Merle was a huge fan of Jimmy Rogers. This is an exact replica of Jimmy Rogers' priceless 0045 that's behind a glass-doored vault in Meridian, Mississippi. Me and Willie almost went to jail that night. I almost feel comfortable telling you the story. Do you have time?
We have time.
Are you getting this on camera?
Yeah, should I turn it off for a second?
Yeah, maybe you should. Either that or do some editing, but I guess it's all right. Enough time to. So I was delivering this guitar. You know, I met with him several times and taken all the specs off of his famous N20 Martin, and I was replicating it without all the wear and tear. And I finished it, and he was coming through on tour. And he was doing sparring lessons with Larry Holmes. Can you imagine that?
Well, that's sparring.
I mean, Willie's like this big and weighs about 90 pounds.
Who was doing the teaching?
You'd think Willie could get a better job.
Yeah, really.
It's a small
So
target.
Willie loves to, you know, just punch Larry Holmes.
Yeah.
You know, not doing it. But he did that in the morning, and he said, come by around 3 in the afternoon. So I got there at 3, and the tour, this is over the Commodore Inn in Phillipsburg, New Jersey. And his tour bus is outside, and knock on the bus, and this like 6'11" guy named Pootie. Been with Willie, you know, for like 30 years.
Willie's sleeping. And so why don't you go into the lobby and I'll call you when he's ready. So half an hour goes by and Pootie comes over and says, Willie, we'll see you now. And so I have the guitar and go up on the bus, the doors open, and I get hit in the face with a waft, like a cloud of marijuana smoke. And Willie's sitting there like, hey. Yeah. And I sat down and like, I'm not seated for more than 10 seconds when somebody shoves a spliff like a Louisville slugger in my mouth and is torching it up, and everybody, like 10 people on the bus, and they're all smoking marijuana. And you didn't even need to smoke it to, you know. And so give him the guitar and he, well, this is really nice. Would you like to go on the bus with us over the sound check? You could leave your car here. So I said, sure. I said, sure. So we go, we have to go across the toll bridge, right? And with the cops and everything, and Pootie's the driver, and you know, we got through the toll, I don't know how. Get off the exit at Easton, head into the center circle, and the circle's under construction. They're putting like bricks in. And there's a sign that says no buses. Because when you get to the circle, it's one lane and you can't turn the bus. So we get to the circle, and bus driver is stuck there, can't make the turn, and there's like 50 cars in back of us all honking their horns, and policeman, like a 21-year-old police officer, comes up and starts banging on the door. And Willie's in there, you know, and they're all smoking their it's wafting out the windows and everything.
What year did you say this was?
Huh?
What year did you say this was?
I can't remember.
70s?
No, this would be it's after Clapham, so it would be 1997.
Oh, really? That late?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, this was last week, actually.
Yeah.
Sorry.
22.
Old 22.
Where you crossed the
Right.
Yeah.
So the cop says, you know, what's going on that bus? And Pootie comes out, closes the door behind him, and takes the cop around to the back of the bus and said, this bus is a private country. And he shows him the license plate, which says home trailer or something like that. And the policeman went, I want to go on that bus. What's going on in there? So this is Willie Nelson's bus. Who's Willie Nelson? So finally, cop writes like a $350 ticket, and Pootie gets back on the bus, and the cop backs up all 50 cars, and we get out. And the mayor came to the concert that night, and Willie told him the story, and not the whole story. And the mayor said he would take care of the ticket, which he did. And there's me and Johnny, with tremendous honor at Telluride, and with Paul Simon in New York City with Chris Martin. Paul was having allergy problems that day. He's all puffy. And that's Mark Knopfler, my favorite, absolute all-time guitar player of anybody, and the nicest guy in the world. And that's with Sting in New York City. Brilliant musician. And that's me with Elvis. It's actually Johnny Cash's body and Elvis's head. I showed it to Johnny. He thought it was fun. He said, if you're going to put any head on my body, I appreciate that one. So there's my book. I brought a couple of them. Really nice opportunity to write this, and it's in its third printing now. In soft cover now, so it's only $15. And if you want, I'll sign it for you. And that's Steve Miller, and he accompanied me on the National Book Tour because he wrote the foreword to the book. A great friend and a great individual. I've written other books. This one called Da Da Da. It's a little fraction of my guitar collection. Did these two books with Richard Johnston about the history and the technical references for Martin guitars. This was a huge 10-year project. And those are my two little daughters. And I think that's, you've already seen those, so that's it.
Can you, maybe, I don't want to embarrass you, but that was 2009. We were at up at East Stroudsburg. And you were in a good mood and you were doing a Nielsen imitation. Do you remember that story that you said about that? That you showed him your imitation and he wasn't, not Nielsen.
Oh, Neil Young.
Yeah, and he didn't.
Well, yeah, so Neil Young is in, I don't know if you've seen his tour bus. He's got like DeSoto's or something welded on top of his tour bus. Really cool. And it's all handicapped accessible bus because his son is in a wheelchair. And his son was into trains, loved trains. And so Neil bought a controlling interest in Lionel trains. And in York, Pennsylvania, they had the model railroading train trade show. And Neil was there with his engineer's hat running this thing called Lionel Vision with little, it was a brand new thing where they had one of those little computer cameras on the front of the engine, and with huge big screens, and you could see the train where it was going. It was very cool, and he invited me down to talk about a possible signature model. And I took a bunch of guitars, and Neil was out running the trains, and I was sitting on his tour bus with his manager, and waiting for him, and it was really pretty exciting to meet Neil. So he came on the bus, and we were playing guitars back and forth, and he said, I said, you know, I can do you. And he said, really? And he said, let's hear it. And I went, I want to live, I want to give, I cross the ocean for hearts of gold. You didn't appreciate it. That's one of the reasons. Many years later.
No signature.
There's more to the story.
He did it just like that with the nose.
Yeah, just like that. So, this is the oldest Mark guitar in our collection. This is an incredible little ebony and ivory inlaid clock key, adjustable neck, lamb intestine strings. Really great little guitar. This is what guitars were like in really the Viennese or European style that represented about 6 years of Martin's.
When does it date from?
1834. Wow. Within months of his arrival.
Yeah.
This is 1870. And it's funny, it's got the, it's got to be French polish. It's got this cloudiness that wipes right off. You've seen that? It happens with lacquer too. I don't know what's going on with that. You know? Anybody know? If you're,
I think it's evaporating. That's what I think. In a sense, so when it evaporates, it's coming up. It's separating when it gets into the evaporation.
It's like chalky. It's like a chalky cloudiness, and all you do is wipe it, and it goes away, and then a couple of weeks later, it'll come right back.
It's probably just an oxidation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So this is, you know, Brazilian rosewood, and strung with nylon string. Great little light.
It was asked recently about the strings that you brought up with land intestines. And I think
well, sheep or goat. Lamb, sheep or goat.
And John, I think, related the story, or somebody did back, that they originally got the guts from the local slaughterhouse or Hormel up where you live. But the question was, prior to moving to Nazareth out of New York, where would have Mr. Martin gotten his strings for that particular guitar?
Well, these came from Germany. You know, the strings were everything that he had. The strings and the tuning mechanisms, things like this. He would have ordered them through kind of a broker distributor in Markenkirchen from his hometown.
So again, would have been a violin makers who made strings for the guitar, and you'd have to spec them.
There was all kind. Everybody had a little specialty. And then my understanding is that they would cut the intestine into strips and then pull it
through a die
Yep.
to get gradually down to the right diameters.
And then they coat them.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there, you know, there wasn't a string maker, a guitar stringer maker, I guess, dedicated. So it was an interesting.
Well, there were people that just did string.
Yeah, but I was.
And they still made, and this is a new set, costs about $110. And but they're really great strings, and they're perfect for these kind of instruments.
How long do they last?
It lasts forever.
That's not a bad
That
deal.
set has been on for about 5 years, and they sound as good as they did.
They fray if you get your fingers
Yeah, they
dirty,
do.
so you want to keep, I think, your fingers clean.
So this is a 1929 Ditson. These were called bass guitars.
Bass.
They were
Not
played.
minor
They had
bass,
a high nut, and they were played Hawaiian style,
Hawaiian.
and they had fan bracing. But in 1929, Martin made this guitar with X bracing and set it up for standard play. And it's
Surprisingly bright for such a
Incredible.
large instrument.
incredible guitar, bright and crisp.
Yeah.
Does that have any neck support in it?
It would have ebony, a little rectangle of ebony, like that. He laid into a saw cut.
When did the T-bar start?
I think with the orchestra models in 1930, around then, I think. You know, I'm not a neurotic historian.
Okay.
You know, Musselwhite could tell you in a heartbeat, or somebody like that.
Kovacic.
I rely on those people, but it's all in the book, so I can look it up if I have to. But it was somewhere around then. And during the war too. During World War II, that they couldn't use steel, so
Yeah,
they used ebony
I've tore a couple
for 1 year.
43s apart. They had-
Remember the steel pennies?
Yeah.
Same kind of deal. So I also brought a Brazilian rosewood Hank Williams. For the show that we did yesterday, I needed a standard dreadnought, and this thing is. It's got a lot of bling. And you know, I brought these along for you to inspect or play if you want to. And then this is the Jimmy Rogers, and this is the 0045 Adirondack spruce Brazilian rosewood. And Jimmy actually had that on his original guitar, so I photographed it and replicated it. He had it done by a sign painter, and he would do this at the train stop. Beautiful, sweet sound on this guitar. And then, like I said, this one is one that I made. See the little, my humidity was awful in my shop.
Sure that ain't elongated sound hole technology.
Well, the Honduras rosewood, really a small tree, and we were cutting marimba bars for musser, which makes the big wooden xylophones. They're really beautiful, expensive wooden xylophone marimbas. And the logs, they sent us about 200 logs, all about 8 inches in diameter, but there was one log that was big, and we started cutting some guitar sets off it. Didn't tell them. And that's what this guitar came out of. It's really amazing wood, almost, I think maybe better than Brazilian. Great tone.
I see an end pin jack in that. What pickup do you have installed?
It would be an early thin line pickup. Probably this one. You know, I can't remember anymore. It says 1983. So I think probably the early Fishman thin line pickup after Barkus Berry stopped. So not the split saddle. Barkus Berry had the time had to split the saddle in half because the wire came in from the middle. Now the wire comes in from the end, and you can use it. So this doesn't have a split pickup on it. So I'm assuming it's the original Fishman. I'm pretty stuck on Fishman only because they're so convenient, and Martin uses them. Any questions?
I wanted to thank you, Dick, for bringing the history books up to speed for us all, people with an interest. I had met Longworth when I was a young man and bought his book, and that is my Bible. But you know, he passed away.
There was no index.
No index. But you got, I thought that was a monumental effort that's absolutely necessary for us for in the future.
The production charts were there. You know, we've discovered some errors. People have reported, well, on page 392, in the 4th column to the right and the 15th column down, you've got, you know, get a life.
But you made all those corrections, and that's I think key in a good editorial.
A lot of corrections made to Longworth's numbers, and we're still finding, as we do research in the archives, we're still finding little anomalies.
When you
Go ahead.
when you were first working on those drawings, was that the first documentation of the dimensions of things, or had
there's documentation that goes back, but no draftings. So there'd be little pencil sketches,
right.
But mostly it was the foreman's notebook. Each foreman in each area, like the lacquering area or the machine room or whatever, they'd have a little notebook that they would keep and they would guard in their desk, and it would be, one page would be front block, dreadnought, 1 13/16, and then my French. How many shims to put in the fixture to get the right dimension after you were, you know, between 1 13/16. It was just.
And he'd pass it on to his.
Yeah, he'd pass it on to the next person and explain it, and there'd be one for every the braces and the radiuses and everything, you know. And so that's what the drafting process was, to get all of that information out of the foreman's hands and into fixed drawings. And it was a great process for me.
How long did it take you?
Well, I could have stretched that out for years, and I probably could have. I probably could have worked on them for 5 years, and it wouldn't. But I got them all done in a year, and then I got fired. A worker, and they called me on the phone, and well, it's a longer story because I did the drawing. I did the D28 drawing while I was fired, and I framed it up and brought it to Mr. Martin, and he came out and I gave it to him. He said, "That's very nice. Haven't seen you around much." And I said, "Oh, you didn't know that I was fired?" "Fired? Well, that's not right." And so then he had somebody call me. I came back and worked on the line. And one day I was walking through and I saw Mr. Martin standing with the quality control guy near this box, and there's a box full of about 50 broken banjo rims. And Mr. Martin is there. "Well, that's not right." And he says, "Well, those are the banjo rims that Dick Boak got fired over at Bosworth, you know." So Bosworth was in the next day, back in his stuff.
Did they give him a complimentary banjo rim?
Whole box.
It's nice. It's
Justice.
I've been in the same position. It's nice to see the comeuppance. You don't like to see anything bad happen to people, but it is sometimes nice to see comeuppance.
Piece of wood weighs, you know, you can build 50 guitars out of the exact same stuff, and there'd be a tremendous difference in the weights.
Martin, and I have to tell you this story just as a way of thanking Martin, because I am where I am because of some people at CF Martin especially. In the days of Royce and Jeremy over at 33 shop, I remember I actually started building because of an injury. And I built a couple guitars.
That was when you had your lobotomy?
No, right before the bottle
full frontal. I built a couple guitars, showed them to Jerry. He introduced me to the world of eBay. That's how I got into the molds. But Sherry Huff's seen some of my work. And then I was cordially invited for a 2-week training out at Repair with a bunch of idiots out there. Hess was in charge of Repair at that time.
Yeah.
And anybody here knows Dave Musselwhite. I was working with Gary, again with Vanilla, he doesn't work there anymore, to learn how to pull necks.
Yeah.
He said, "I got to go to the bathroom and just watch the pot." And I'm sitting here by myself, and all of a sudden behind me, I hear a guitar hit the floor. Never heard one before, but you knew exactly what it was. Between Musselwhite and Hess, they were all ready to escort me out because I damaged this guitar, but they were waiting and they set me up, which I got to tell you was one hell of a good joke. But you know, without that, I wouldn't be where I'm at. And I don't think Martin does that anymore. They used to, I think.
Oh, they have a repair. They did a repair thing last year.
Yeah, they did but they used to, I guess, if they saw somebody with talent, brought them in, taught them, and then gave them your authorization, then
anybody that wants to come in, any warranty center that would like to come in and look over Milt's shoulder. Milt is fantastic. He's one of the best.
Yeah, he is.
But yeah, they don't mind. They do that.
Yeah, well, I wasn't even the center then.
Yeah.
They actually took me in order
Well,
to make it.
you're so good looking, you know.
They were, no, I was a donut. I had to bring 2 dozen of donuts a day, so that's a little popular.
So what are you doing now? What's next? I mean, you get to the office, your feet at the floor in the morning. Where do you?
Well, I'm involved in everything. I publish our magazine, which is the Sounding Board. So I'm the editor, and I have to make sure that all happens. And I write a lot of text. But I'm also in charge of the museum and the archives. And there's a lot of book projects and research projects and museum exhibitions like the Metropolitan Museum of Art that we're doing in 2014. And so I'm involved in all the museum and archive and book projects. And then there's still a smattering of limited editions that are kind of stragglers. I'm trying to get out of doing that, but I have a bunch still going on. And there's constant new product ideas and things where I have to either defend them screwing up something or put forward an idea to make something better. So I consider my job, aside from any specific thing that I do, I consider to try to be the conscience of the company, or to try and be the ghost of CF III, who he preserved the integrity of the guitars for like 60 years. You know, they didn't make any changes. You know, and he was fabulous. So I just try to make sure that the guitars stay great. And the custom shop, unbelievable guitars coming through the custom shop, and most of the guitars through production in Nazareth are fabulous, and most of the guitars, even though it's not what I'm interested in, the guitars out of Mexico with the laminates and different things are good sounding, good value for entry-level players that it's important to get to somehow.
I kind of took over the Sigma line that you had.
Yeah.
I mean, the Sigma line, there were some pretty decent guitars.
Yeah. And the Shenandoahs.
Yeah.
So we don't have a very big budget.
Oh yeah, well, I didn't expect
We
that.
want to present you
I was
with
hoping I'd get one.
our shirt. Yes, this is a large. We have a large meeting, an extra large, and you can.
So if you take this, you can.
It should come right out. Yes, yes.
No, this is great.
So yeah, so thank you. So we're in Pride, and thanks very much for being here.
Thank you. So that poor pig is probably burnt to a crisp. Thanks for coming. Buy guitars if you want.
Yeah, but it's actually
If you're even in the ballpark.
Well, maybe that should be one coming up.